So, Katie, would you like to make an introduction on our speaker?
Yes. Deb and I interviewed Valerie Bugh last week to get ready for this presentation, and we enjoyed it very much. Val is a lifelong naturalist, and she has studied a lot of different aspects of our natural world, but lately has focused on insects. She's runs the Fauna Project at the Ladybird Johnson Wildflower Center. And in that situation, she has led entomology, insect discovery walks, entomology classes, does insect and spider identifications for people, and gives talks like this. But she's also authored some pocket guides, which you might have used. The folding ones that you carry with you on butterflies of Central Texas, spiders of Texas, and unusual insects of Texas. She takes all of her own photographs. And if you look at her website, well, she has several websites, but austinbug.com has a lot of beautiful photos of moths and butterflies and other insects. And besides all of this, Val is a concert musician, plays the clarinet with the Lyric Orchestra in Austin. And we just were astonished at how many interests and skills she has. So, Valerie, I'm really glad that you were able to talk to us today, even though the National Moth Week ended yesterday, but we're still here in honor of the moths. So thank you, Val.
You're welcome. And hopefully I'm screen sharing now.
You are?
Okay. Okay, so the talk today is definitely moths. And if you're wondering about the strange title, I'll explain that right away about the majority bit. So here's something y'all can learn all these names right away. This is the family tree of Lepidoptera, and it includes the butterflies and moths. And all those little stuff, all the stuff in the little orangey part are moths, and the butterflies are the little white square in the middle. So you get an idea of how Lepidoptera is really organized. The butterflies are a small subset nestled within the moths. And you really don't have to learn all those names of stuff, but just for an idea, we have a list of at least 2,000 species of Lepidoptera in the hill country, and about 150 of those are butterflies. So moths are a huge portion of that. And you don't see them that much. And there are a couple of reasons, the first of which, of course, is that moths are mostly nocturnal. And we do much better when we can see during the daylight. But these are, everybody said, oh, how do you tell a butterfly from a moth? I'll tell you what the real secret is just learn your butterflies, and then everything else is a moth. It's a lot easier than trying to tell the differences. But these are some kind of rules that go by, like the moths are mostly nocturnal. There are no butterflies that can see at night. They have a very hard time seeing in the dark, so they're all diurnal. They fly during the day. So moths tend to have adaptations for the nighttime. They are kind of hairy to keep the heat of their muscles in, so it's because there's no sunshine to warm them up. They're much more responsive to noises. And moth diversity is huge. A lot of butterflies they're very similar. They're clustered in the same groups within the taxonomic tree. So like all butterflies feed as adults, but not all moths do. There's a lot of room for variation, and just about any kind of anomaly. Every time I say something about moths, I almost have to say most or almost all, because there's very few absolutes with it. So one thing that is different and that you hear a lot is you can tell a moth by its antennae, and they're different than a butterfly. So butterflies supposedly have a thin antenna with a little knob on the end. And that's the case for most of them. You can see, like right here, is a little knob. So all of these are butterflies, and all of these are moths. And it's easy if the moths have feathery antennas. No butterfly would have antennas like that. But some of the moths don't have that. They have kind of long, thin antennas. And they might even have sort of a club shape on the end of them. So there again, we're getting in those fuzzy areas where, well, if you were just looking at the antenna, you'd have a hard time telling a moth from a butterfly. But if you add it into the other things you can look at, like their wings and the patterns, that makes it a lot easier. So I'll go through some of the things that get mixed up with moths really easy, so you can eliminate these from moths. And one of them are the skippers. And this is a group that's normally, we always kind of associate them with butterflies. They're very different than the other 5 families of butterflies, though. They tend to be smaller. They tend to have kind of a big head versus a smaller body. Their wings are not showy and colorful. To a lot of people, they look kind of moth-like. But they do fly during the day, and you'll see them all. They're very common, and they're our biggest family of butterflies, in fact. However, they're not considered moths, and you will find them in your butterfly book. There are other things that look lots more like moths. The biggest one, or biggest group that's easy to mix up, and even experienced entomologists do this sometimes, caddisflies. If you live anywhere near water, or close enough that you would get some aquatic insects, you've probably seen some of these things. These are all caddisflies, and they are closely related to the Lepidoptera. They're in another order, but they are related. They have fuzzy wings, they have long antennas, they have a look that looks like a lot of moths, but they're not related that closely, so they're not considered moths. Sometimes we even have a fly that is tiny and has moth-like wings, and it's called a moth fly, but it's really a fly. And there are a couple other insects that just at a glance you think, oh, this might be a moth, but it's not. When we get to the caterpillars or the larvae, it gets harder too. These are larvae that you can find on plants that are not moths. So syrphid fly, these are actually maggots. You'll see these on plants, especially milkweeds that have a lot of aphids. You can find these kind of little larvae, and they're busy eating aphids, so they're very helpful in your garden. But they are not a moth caterpillar. And a few leaf beetle larvae look a lot like a little caterpillar. You'll see when I show you how diverse moth caterpillars are that you would think these don't look a lot like caterpillars, but they look something like some moths. And this is the one that gets a lot of people. I get questions about these all the time. And somebody will see this beautiful purple sawfly on velvet leaf mallow. And they'll say, what butterfly will this turn into? Well, it doesn't turn into a butterfly, and it doesn't turn into a moth either. It's in the Hymenoptera, which are the wasps. Sawflies are a non-stinging kind of wasp, but their babies are vegetarian, they feed on plants, and they look lots like caterpillars. So just be aware that there are things that look like a caterpillar that are simply not a moth. So when we study moths, we've got a couple of ways we do it. You can collect caterpillars by using a beat sheet. And you see people in action here. They hold a thing that looks like a kite held down, and you whack the branches above that and see what falls out. Sometimes the caterpillars will fall out. You don't stand under it with your mouth open. That's not a really smart thing to do. So you have to kind of practice this to get good at it. And to catch adult Lepidoptera, a butterfly net, it works. Even nocturnal moths, if you flush them out during the day, they will fly. So if you do like sweep netting and something, you can catch some moths and see them. It's just they'll kind of fly away if you don't keep track of them. It's lots easier to get the caterpillars. The best ways, though, is to find the moths at night. And we have ways of luring them. And that's black lighting, using an actual black light, like a UV party light, the kind that you can buy at Walmart for $20 to enlighten liven your party. They work just as well to attract insects. So here's just a black light hung on the side of somebody's garage. And you can see the way it attracts the insects. This is in the morning after it's been on at night. We often use a sheet because it's white. And if anybody's been paying attention to Moth Week, which goes on, just ended, they have a lot of events, especially in the northern part of the country where it's not so hot, even at night. They will have moth lighting sheets, and you see what comes, and it can be amazing. You will see all these insects you just never knew were out there. So the best attractant is a full spectrum light, something that kind of mimics a bright enough light like sunlight, and mercury vapor lights are the best thing for that. You don't want to look right at these because it's kind of like looking at the sun. You can actually, if you spend too much time by a light like this, you'll get sunburned. I've never seen anybody get that a lot, but I've seen it a little bit. So the mercury vapor really attracts things. And this is a typical researcher over there checking the light sheet to see what's attracted at this time. So if you think there are no moths around, wow, just put out a light in your backyard and you won't get this kind of reaction. This is at the very best. A couple of these are from Arizona at the start of the monsoon. So at this time of year in Arizona, it's pretty good. Okay, so moths have a complete life cycle, complete metamorphosis, like the majority of insects. And so they go through different phases. They shed their skin in between each one. Just give a quick overview. Of course, they start as an egg. The adult female lays the eggs. They hatch into little caterpillars, and the caterpillars eat and grow. That's their big job. And then when they're ready to mature, they become a pupa. In butterflies, this part is called the chrysalis. But that term is only used for butterflies because there's a bit of prejudice. Everybody likes butterflies better than moths. But moths don't get their own special term. They're just called a pupa. And so this is what a lot of the eggs of moths look like. They're quite varied. They might be in huge groups, or they might be laid singly. A big moth, of course, has a bigger egg. And some of the eggs, like these, were laid on my garage window, which you think, where do the caterpillars, how do they get to the food source? Well, they can't walk there because there's nothing to eat on the garage. But they can most of them can balloon, which means they release silk from their mouth and it carries away in the wind, and the little caterpillar babies hopefully end up on something they can eat. And a lot of the caterpillars that you see that are moth caterpillars are called worms. Now, we all know that they're not worms. Worms are like earthworms or leeches. They're a whole different group of animals. But the way these are termed, whenever the prefix is connected to the word worm, means they're not a real worm. It's just a colloquial name for them. So some of these might look familiar to you because they are garden pests. There are even butterflies that are garden pests too, but we have a little bit of soft spot in our heart for butterflies. But when it comes to a moth, oh no, squish them all. So anyway, a lot of the caterpillars with the name worm are, of course, moths. The pupas of moths vary a lot, just like you would expect from things that can be very tiny or very large. Moths have a huge size range. And some of the pupas are very interesting looking. Some of them do not have a cocoon around them. And so you can find them just kind of naked, hanging somewhere. This one, if you're wondering what that cool thing is, that is the proboscis of that sphinx moth. That's how long that mouth part is, that it actually gets its own structure on the pupa. Kind of cool. So the cocoon part is something that goes around the pupa, and it's made with silk that the caterpillars can produce with their mouth parts. That's where we get commercial silk. It's made from the cocoons of silkworms. So these are just some examples of moth pupas that have a cocoon around them. And they can vary quite a bit. They usually look kind of fuzzy and felt-like. Sometimes they got leaves mixed in with them. Sometimes they're even wrapped within leaves. Okay, I mentioned about the proboscis. This is how all Lepidoptera feed. They have a tube that's actually two halves of a tube that go together. And because some of our moth species are really big, you can see that proboscis real easy. And it's fascinating to see how they can control it. So when you see a moth like this, which are sometimes called hummingbird moths, they do feed just like a hummingbird does. They can get that proboscis stuck down deep into the flower to get the nectar, but it's so flexible. I mean, it can curl up when they want to. They can extend it. They can probe with it. So this is the way when a moth does feed, this is what they use. There are some moths that as adults never feed. They have reduced mouth parts. They have very little digestive system. They live for less than a week usually as an adult. Moths have some kind of cool adaptations, one of which is, remember I mentioned they're nocturnal, so they don't have sunlight to make them warm, but they can do a thing called flight muscle shivering, which they vibrate their flight muscles without really flying. They're warming their bodies up because a lot of moths have to be at a certain temperature before they can actually fly. So there are other insects that can do this too, like bumblebees can do it. But it's a real pain if you're trying to photograph one and it suddenly gets scared and it wants to warm itself up because then those muscles vibrate so fast that it flares the wings. But that will help it warm up till it's at flight temperature, and then it can be active again. But sometimes we will see nocturnal moths active during the day. And this will be happening later this year. It always happens in the fall, when the nights start getting too cold. It's a dream away. Right now, it's so hot you wouldn't even imagine a cold night, but eventually it gets that way. So nocturnal moths will, as a last-ditch effort to feed, they will start flying earlier in the day when it's warmer. These are moths with no defenses against anything, any predators that see them. So if you see moths feeding like this and a wren comes by or something, you can watch the wren have lunch. It's like they just eat them all. But it's something that moths will do just to survive a little bit longer. So I mentioned about how hairy moths are, especially compared to butterflies. Some of them, they would make really cute stuffed animal toys. And these are all the moths I'm showing you are local, unless I think I picture one that's not from around here. But these are all ones I've found in the Austin area. So we have some moths that are just gorgeous like this. And yes, these can fly. It's hard for them to fly. They have a heart. They don't do it a lot. And so once they're settled, they often don't like moving a lot because it's a tough thing for them to get airborne again. I'll give a quick overview of all 90-some families of moths. No, I'm just kidding. I will just tell you about a few of them, just so you have an idea of the bigger families. So there used to be only this family, the Noctuidae, and the Prominence, that look sort of similar. The Noctuidae was then split, and it includes the Erebidae. So these two families, within the last, 10, 15 years, they were split apart. So both of them have the same common name. They're owlet moths. These are huge families with a lot of are kind of very typical looking moths. This family has also absorbed two other families. So as with almost everything in the natural world, with DNA analysis, they've been able to solidify the real taxonomic relationships. And so our ideas of how to sort these out have changed. So these are usually larger moths, the kind you would notice. Everybody's favorite are the Saturniidae, the giant silk moths. I mean, who doesn't love to see one of these kinds? And this is one group that does not feed as adults. So they do all their feeding as a larva. And then the adults emerge, you see them for a couple days and they're gone. The sphinx moths, these are those fast flyers that look like hummingbirds, or they fly. Sometimes you'll see them at dawn and dusk. Some even fly during the day, but not a lot of them do. The inchworm moths, Geometridae, edit geometry and inchworms, I'll show you the caterpillars later. So most of these will perch with their wings kind of open like a butterfly. And these are just generalizations. There are some overlaps that make it really hard to get to the right family sometimes because the moths just don't fit the typical look. Moths are divided artificially by us into two big groups. They're called macro moths and micro moths. Those are original. However, they don't refer just to the size. A lot of the micros are really tiny, like the smallest ones are about 3 millimeters long when they're folded up. But some of the micro moths are fairly large too. So it has to do with taxonomy and where they are in the groups. So the macro moths were the ones I just showed you with the definitely big ones. So these are smaller moth families. They're huge. They have a lot of species, a lot of interesting ones. Some are pretty, some are kind of brown and So Tortricidae leaf roller moths. You have all seen these whether you know it or not. The black witch is our biggest lepidopteran. It is a huge moth that sometimes people mistake it for a butterfly because it holds its wings out like this. This one's in the family Erebidae. You can kind of get a feel for how large it is by how small that head and the body is kind of big and bulky. These are very strong flyers. They can have a 6-inch wingspan. And they're a gorgeous moth. They're called the black witch. If you look up anything about the black witch online, you'll get all kinds of cool mythology and neat stories about them. They show up in our area regularly. They've already been sighted a couple of times this year. So they can't really survive a hard freeze at any stage. So they're a tropical moth that regularly comes up north. And they make it all the way up to Canada, actually, because they're very strong flyers. So here are some of our giant silk moths, the Saturniidae. These are the ones that you'll see the most often. And sometimes to get them to spread like that, if you ever find one that's got its wings down flat, kind of like this would be. See how there's spots under there? You can't see them except just through the other wing. But these would be sitting the same way. But sometimes if you like blow at them or touch them a little bit, they'll do that. They'll open up like that. And the sphinx moths. So this is the white line sphinx. It's one that you'll see fairly regularly around here. Very pretty. They are incredible pollinators. And I should mention, moths are an important source of pollination. Everybody always says, are butterflies pollinators? Well, yeah, but they're kind of a minor component compared to bees and flies and moths. Moths do a tremendous amount of pollination at night. They are active on those flowers, and a lot of flowers don't close up at night. Here's a moth family that you want to be on the lookout for. I am still waiting to see a live one of this. These are the swallowtail moths. It looks like a big butterfly. It's a tropical species. This is a typical member of the same family from South Texas. So this is kind of how dull they can be and how spectacular they can be. I remember a number of years ago seeing a report and seeing great pictures of one that was found up in the Waco area. And it's like, oh boy, wouldn't you love to see that at your garden? Okay, I mentioned about the Tortricidae. These are the leaf roller moths. Everybody asks in the spring, what are all those green worms? There we go with caterpillars being called worms, hanging down from the oak trees. This is the culprit. And so these are what the adult moths are often kind of small, brown. That's the pupa shell that it came out of. So when they pupate, they actually put themselves inside of leaves. That's where they get the leaf roller. They use their silk to hold the leaves together. They can use that same silk to drop down out of the tree. And they do that when there's some bird up there foraging or something that scared them and they want to get away from it, so they drop out of sight, then gradually climb back up. You can see the little bit of silk here as this caterpillar is gathering it back up to move back up to its tree to feed more. Here's another moth family that people notice but often aren't sure what it is. These are the bagworms, those weird kind of hanging sacks that you see. We have little ones and big ones. That's the technical terms for them. Okay, so this is a very small species. There's the little caterpillar's head. And here's a bigger one. That's the head. It's sticking out of that sac that it makes for itself. So bagworms, you won't see the caterpillar outside its bag. They feed on leaves. They don't really occur in such huge numbers that they're any problem. But then you see these silk things, the bags, they might last on the branch for 2 or 3 years. It takes them a long time for that silk to just degrade and finally fall down. The weird thing about these, the females look like this. They are nothing more than a head on a sack of eggs, and they never leave their sack. This one came out of a sack that I was hoping a male would come out of, and she didn't get fertilized, so eventually she dropped out of the sack. I'm not sure why, but I was amazed when I saw this because I'd never seen one before. The males have wings and look like a typical little moth, and they emerge from their pupa sac, which is a cocoon basically at this point. Here is the old pupa shell. So that was a male that left that one. And he has to find a female and mate with her. So speaking of the difference between the winged and unwinged ones, we have several kinds of moths where only the males have wings. And the females simply don't fly. They look kind of odd. Like this one's got little teensy wings. This one has almost nothing in the way of wings. And all they do is emerge. The males come to them by way of pheromones that the females produce, and the males will mate with them. The female will lay eggs just about anywhere on the side of your house, on a tree, hopefully. The caterpillars then will hopefully either balloon away to find trees, or they will walk to where there's a leaf to feed on. This is another family of moths that are kind of an interesting one, the plume moths. So when they spread their wings out, you can kind of see it on this. They are separated. They have like feathers, it looks like. They're all small. They tend to be attracted to lights around houses, and they show up in people's houses, and they have no idea what these T-shaped weird moths are. Well, that's what they are. They're a moth. And again, just a family of fairly small moths. It's not a big family, but they're unusual looking. And just to wrap up our little overview of moth families, we went from the really huge ones to the tiny ones. A large number of moths are leaf miners. And so the caterpillar actually feeds within the layers of a leaf or in a stem, or they feed internally on plants. So in this one, that whole long thing was where the caterpillar fed, and it's right up there, and it will eventually pupate and come out. And most of the adults are they're usually 5 millimeters or less in length. They're real tiny, and you only see them if you're looking real hard. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the ecology of caterpillars, and we'll start with what feeds on caterpillars. How come we don't have caterpillars everywhere? Well, birds are a big number. And in fact, during the spring nesting season, when the caterpillars are kind of at their height, especially those leaf rollers, it's a very important food source for birds. Even seed feeders need to feed their baby nestlings on protein. They need to have things like caterpillars to make them grow up big and healthy. If sparrows tried to feed their babies only seeds, they probably wouldn't survive. They need to have insects too. And caterpillars are simply little walking bits of protein. But a lot of other things feed on caterpillars too, including arboreal reptiles, like the rough green snake and the green anoles, lizards. They spend their whole time up in the trees looking for things to eat, and caterpillars are just sitting there waiting. There are also insect predators. A really funny one is the fact that this fiery searcher is also called a caterpillar hunter. It's in the family called ground beetles. This is almost never found on the ground. They live in trees. So it's a non-ground ground beetle. It's real pretty. Sometimes you'll see these knocked out of the trees, but they generally stay up high where you can't see them. Some of our stink bugs, which feed through a tube, are predatory. Instead of feeding on plants, they feed on mostly caterpillars. And I think it's probably because stink bugs are not real fast moving. They can't catch fast prey. The caterpillars are anything but fast, so they can just walk up to the caterpillar, stick their proboscis in it, and suck it dry. And they pretty much do that. There are also wasps that attack the caterpillars. This is a bigger issue than most people realize, that wasps are a major predator of caterpillars. So when they're solitary wasps, they will catch a caterpillar, paralyze it with a sting, and not kill it, but they'll put it in a nest, lay an egg on that, and seal it up. And then the female goes off to do it again. So the social wasps, on the other hand, these are paper wasps. They will catch a caterpillar, butcher it right then, kill it, and they often will cut off bits because they can't carry the whole thing. And so they cut off parts, and then they take the rest back to the nest to feed the queen's grubs. Spiders, of course, are predators, and they will go after anything they can catch, even each other. But again, caterpillars are sure easy for them to catch. And so you frequently will see caterpillars being eaten by, jumping spiders or crab spiders. And there are a number of other things besides just predation. A parasitoid is a parasite that kills its host. So this poor caterpillar looks healthy enough, but it's got all these black dots on it. Every one of those is an entry point from a little tiny, this was a braconid wasp. And so it laid eggs on it, and these are all the little larvae inside feeding on that caterpillar. They will eventually kill it. And of course, caterpillars can get diseases too. Viruses, bacterial infections, fungal infections are very common. Those will do away with caterpillars too. So another parasitoid that is not a wasp are flies, taconid flies. They lay little white eggs on the body of their prey. They often put the eggs in places where the caterpillar can't reach around and bite them off. And so they're, close to the head or, on the upper part of the body. In this case, this is what an adult taconid fly looks like. They vary a lot. It's a huge family. So some of them are bigger and some are tiny. A good number of them look a lot like a housefly. But some caterpillars have some defense against this. See all the white spots on this one? They look just like taconid fly eggs, but they're just the markings on the caterpillar. So it actually is signaling, oh, I've already got so many parasites on me, you don't want to lay your eggs here. And it seems to work because sometimes you'll see eggs, these are 2 eggs laid only on the head capsule. And I've tried to find out whether or not that's a successful thing, like will those eggs hatch and get through the head capsule, or are they just wasted and they won't hatch because they can't make it through? I really can't, I don't know the answer because I haven't been able to find it yet. So another parasitoid are braconid wasps. This is going to start looking familiar because some of these you've probably seen in gardens and that. So these are cocoons all around a dead caterpillar. Those are the cocoons of the wasp babies. After they finish feeding inside the caterpillar, they're done. Braconid wasps are often used for biocontrol. They are a safe way to eliminate a pest species, and they don't tend to attack more than a small number of species, sometimes only one, because they have to survive inside of that caterpillar as they grow, and they have to overcome its immune system, which is definitely takes some evolutionary time. So these are the very familiar kinds of braconid cocoons you sometimes see on big caterpillars. So these caterpillars have already been feeding those wasps. They're going to die eventually. They're still alive, but barely. They tend to keep feeding. They won't metamorphosize. They won't turn into it. They won't pupate. These are all the wasps that will then go off to infect other caterpillars. Ichneumons are another kind of wasp that are pretty much the same as braconids. They have some pretty cool kind of cocoons though. So if you ever find a little thing that looks sort of like a felt-covered Easter egg, it's an ichneumon cocoon. And here's a kind of wasp that actually doesn't even have to survive inside the caterpillar. It puts its eggs on the outside of the caterpillar and they hatch, and these are the larvae feeding, kind of like leeches, only they will kill it. So this is what it'll look like in the end. The caterpillar, fed the babies, the baby wasps then pupate underneath the caterpillar after they've kind of mummified it. And it looks like, and they produce this stuff that looks sort of like mold. And it's thought that that's probably to make the dead caterpillar look unappetizing so nothing happens to eat it, which would kill the wasps too. So that's one of the little wasps coming out from its pupa. That's how tiny they are. And some caterpillars have a weird little marking right about in the same place where those wasps would lay their eggs on their body. This is the normal coloration. So there's another trickery to say, look, I've already got something here. Don't lay your eggs on me. And I've saved the weirdest for last on all these wasp things. So if you don't like the big words, polyembrionic, parasitoid, this is this was a caterpillar. There's the head capsule, and that was kind of what it made of, a little bit of a cocoon. All these little rice grains are wasp pupae. And what the mother wasp did was she laid one egg inside of the caterpillar, and as it grew, it exponentially divided until it used up all the resources in that caterpillar. So it produced all those. So these are all clones of the same wasp. Sometimes the wasp will lay 2 eggs, and there'll be one male and one female. But they just divide until they've used up all the resources within that one caterpillar. So pretty bizarre. But don't worry, caterpillars can survive. They don't all die. It seems like they might with all those things working against them. So their number one defense is camouflage. This is one of the reasons why a lot of caterpillars are specific to a host plant. Well, they match it very well. And so they get used to eating that particular plant. They match it. You don't even see them when they're on it. There are 4 caterpillars here. Like this one is just right along the stem, and so is this one. That's a very successful way. It's really hard to see those when they're on the stems like that. Others kind of look like the foliage. They just kind of match. Sometimes they look like twigs, and they can look like this on juniper. Oh my gosh! Even when you are doing beet sheeting and you get these in the beet sheet, you have to kind of mess with them to see if they're a caterpillar or just a twig, because they look that good. And some of them will match like what they're eating. They'll change color even for the flowers. Caterpillar skin color is not necessarily set. Some of them can actually, their skin is so thin that the colors they absorb from the plant will show through. And remember all those little black dots on the parasitized caterpillar? Well, this one has little black dots too, but this is the healthy caterpillar. These are just its markings. And so it's actually got fake damage. So the wasps that would want to lay eggs would see that and know what it means. And it's an arms race, who's going to believe these trickeries and is it going to help? Some caterpillars actually respond when you touch them. The lappet moth normally looks like this. It's pretty hard to see, but if something touches it, it uncovers these kind of bright red marks on it. Another one, this one will flip over to show off its really scary purple belly. And here's something that you don't often think of as a defense, but it's variation. So these 3 caterpillars are all from the same brood. They were feeding on the same plant, but look how different they all look. So if a bird is coming and just, sees a caterpillar, it will eat that. But what if it doesn't know that some of the caterpillars are not looking the same as the other one that it saw? So a search image, if it's messed with, sometimes that's a very successful way of surviving. So out of 40 caterpillars, maybe 5 or 6 of them will still survive because they're not all found because of the variability of their colors. But camouflage still works. So these have fringe setae, which are the little hairs that actually get rid of its shadow. So it looks like just a lump on the branch. And then there's a group, I mentioned the prominence, Notodontidae. Their moths they're interesting, but not anything spectacular. But some of their caterpillars are some of the weirdest looking things. The Stegosaurus look is really pretty cool. This feeds on cedar elm. The edges of the leaves have little serrations, and the caterpillar will eat a section out and then kind of replace the leaf. Same thing happens on this one. It eats out a piece of the leaf, and it looks like a part of the dead leaf. Sometimes they look like the leaves. The camouflage for them is really pretty interesting. Some caterpillars spend time on the ground. 2 different reasons. One, they might eat lichens. And so a lichen moth would be under a log. That's a pretty safe place to be. But a lot of others, like cutworms in a garden, they feed at night mainly, and then they retreat down to the ground and kind of bury themselves so they disappear during the day. So, the gardener comes out and goes, "What's been eating my plants?" If you dig around at the base of the plant, or if you go out at night with a flashlight, you'll see them. So sometimes staying hidden down in the ground is a good place. And some of these caterpillars can look extraordinarily uncaterpillar-like. This one looks like a combination of a weird little stick, a bird dropping sort of. That bit on the top is a shed head capsule. So when the caterpillar molts, just like with rattlesnakes, how their rattle doesn't completely come off, on this, the head capsule doesn't. This one only has one, but sometimes you can find these with several head capsules stuck on the hairs right behind their head. And they will, if you bother them, they shake it so that thing kind of wiggles as if it's trying to distract you from the actual caterpillar. It's this weird little flying thing. And of course, this one looks a lot like a vine. And what about eye spots? Oh, if you want to scare a small bird, you look kind of like a snake that's been hiding in the vegetation. And so in this case, well, if one pair of eyes is scary, just think what a bunch of them is. That's a lot of eye spots. But generally, it's thought because the caterpillars can swell up the part of their body under the eye spots, that it's definitely a defense to show those big, scary spots. And, some of these caterpillars don't even look like much. A glob, just a blob on a leaf, doesn't look that much. Venom, though, if you've ever had an encounter with a puss caterpillar and touched it without realizing it and then felt like you've just been in nettles, well, that's because they have little spines underneath that hair that have venom in them. Same thing with this little spiny oak slug. The venom in those spines will certainly deter most predators. And of course, numbers. Some caterpillars, you'll find them in huge numbers. That can be good in several ways for them. One, the predator won't eat them all. 2, they might have venomous spines, and so more of them is more venomous. Or even 3, they're poisonous. And that means that the distasteful bit is inside of them due to what they're eating. These Datana feed on sumac, which has some toxins in it that can turn the caterpillar's pretty nasty taste. And so they also advertise that color. I'm going to talk about this a little more as we go on. Aposematic coloring are warning colors. That means don't eat me, I don't taste good, or I've got some kind of defense that you won't like. So reds, yellows, mixed with black and white are often used in the insect world to signal to other insects and to birds that is distasteful. I mean, think about the monarch butterfly, orange and black and white. They're distasteful from feeding on milkweeds. So these are a couple of our common silk moths in the area that have venomous caterpillars. The Io has those spines, so does the buck moth. And these can be fairly numerous at times. And so, if you're trimming a lot of vegetation in that, most people, if they see them, they're not going to grab them. But if you don't see them and they get across against your skin, especially in a sensitive place like the inner part of your arm, it can hurt. And caterpillars, of course, some of them are going to mimic the ones that do have that kind of defense. So on these, you would look at these and go, they all look kind of scary. I don't think I'll eat any of those. Well, the bottom two do have a bit of poison spines with them. The top two don't. However, this one does feed on milkweed, which would make it distasteful. So it's not completely lying and cheating, but these weird patterns and mimicking each other is very common with caterpillars. Even just having stiff hairs, which are called setae, is a good way to keep a wasp off. I've seen this happen where a parasitic wasp wants to come and lay an egg on a caterpillar, and it might get to them, but they can't reach to the caterpillar's skin unless, and the caterpillar might even do a defense thing like this, and they can't get through because those spines are sticking out. So there's not necessarily any venom there, but the caterpillars are still protected just by the hairs. And that silk that caterpillars can produce, they can use it for 3 different things. They can use it as an escape line, like a bungee cord. This one's gathering up and heading back up. They can use it to sew leaves together. So I split that one open. They'll be able to fix it. But they kind of combine the leaves, and so they're protected in a little shelter. Or they can use the webbing straight out to keep other predators away. It's very hard for wasps and sometimes even birds to get into these webbed. This is the fall webworm, which we see all the time. So one of the best ways to kind of open those up to predation is use a long stick and just open them and kind of wreck them, and then the predators can get in. And caterpillars will sometimes use the silk in a weird way. There's a very common species we have around here called the camouflaged looper. So there's the caterpillar, and the stuff it puts on its back are bits of its food plant. So it puts all kinds of stuff that it's been eating and sticks it on its back with little bits of silk and on little spines. This is what the adults look like. They're kind of pretty. But this is so bizarre because if you're like looking at, say, purple mist flower and you see a little bit of debris moving, you might look close because it might be a caterpillar under there. And some caterpillars even make little houses, then drag them along, just like the bagworms did that. But there are some others that do it too. This one is a really cool looking one. I've only seen it a couple times, and it lives inside of that little house that it built. This household case bearer, everybody's always asking, are all those moths going to eat my clothes? Well, some do, but this one actually lives in houses, but it doesn't eat things like wool and that. It feeds on old spider web. That's its main source of food. So it actually is like helping you clean up if you don't wipe all that stuff away. Okay, so what about the adult moths? What attacks them? Well, number one enemy is bats, because they fly at night. And the bats, they're got sonar. They're out at night eating flying insects. And then, of course, there are orb webs and the webs that a spider makes. So this is definitely a sphinx moth, very strong flyer. It was still caught by that web. There is a little more interesting bit here, though. These are 2 orb weavers that do not make a web. This is one of the few pictures. I've never seen this one in person, so I had to use somebody else's picture, but he's got a great one. So this is called the boa spider. It creates a little silk glob, and it produces a smell that mimics female pheromones for some moths. And this other one is another one around here that does the same thing. They produce a pheromone smell So their main prey are male moths that are lured in, and they catch them when they come, thinking there's a female there. So there are also spiders that don't hunt with a web, and they don't use sight. So crab spiders, they hunt by feel, and they sit in flowers all night and all day. And so sometimes you'll see them having breakfast in the morning because they've caught a moth that night. Jumping spiders, I mentioned them with the caterpillars too. Jumping spiders have probably the best vision of any arthropod at least terrestrial arthropod. And so their eyes are capable of discerning all sorts of detail in that, and they're very good at finding the head and jumping on them and catching them. So they frequently will catch a moth that's even hidden because they are just good at analyzing what they're seeing. And there's all kinds of predators that go after moths, including assassin bugs and yellow jackets, which are hunting for their nest, even scorpions when they're wandering around on a wall. If they find a moth, they'll eat it. But moths do have defenses too, and some of these are pretty cool. So when it comes to bats, one of the main ways that a lot of moths escape being eaten in flight is when they have good ears, they can hear, and they will hear the bats targeting them, and they'll just drop out of the sky. They just stop flying and fall. Well, then to the bat, they're disappeared. But there are some that go so far. This is one from a little farther west in West Texas and farther into Arizona, that they've experimented. It actually produces a sound that jams the sonar of the bats. And so it's producing its own sound to trick them. I mean, this sounds like advanced military tactics here. The Luna moth, those long tails have always puzzled, entomologists and anybody else who thinks about it. Why do they have those and most moths don't? And if you cut those parts off, the moth can still fly just fine. However, they are far more likely to be eaten by a bat without those tails. And so they've done some experiments that show that the tails actually mess up the sonar and make it harder for the bat to pinpoint the moth in flight. And there are some other moths that will even give a warning sound. It's like a clicking sound that the bats can hear. And these are warning that they are distasteful. And sooner or later, every bat probably tries something and then has to spit it out. But they quickly will learn that certain sounds mean don't bother with that because it's not worth eating. Of course, most moths spend their daytime hiding. There are 4 moths in this picture, but their camouflage is often excellent. And if they don't flush out, you just don't even see them. They're that good at blending into background. That same variability that helped the caterpillars, some look like they're easy to see, others aren't, that works with moths too. So if moths have variable patterns, like everything from light to dark, and enough of them land on various surfaces, some of them are going to be well hidden. Others aren't. And it just, so some get eaten, but not all of them will. In our area, a lot of the trees have lichen all over them. So we have lichen mimics. And when these are sitting on a rock or on a tree branch, it matches really well. And some of them even look like they're host plants. And they look like the flowers of them, so they can be feeding right during the day and really not drawing attention to themselves. By the way, these two are mating. That's what moths look like when they're mating. So, this one, this little pyrosta, it's a little purple or a pink moth. It's found on salvias, and we're seeing a lot of them right now. And moths in general can some of them are really weirdly shaped. And if they stay very still, they're sometimes very hard to see. And, I'm singling them out here, but if you're just looking in a general direction, you might not even see them. They might look like a dead leaf or a piece of a stem. And some of them really play that up like they're an extension of a rock. And these moths when you touch them, they often just fall. They don't even try to fly away because that would blow their cover. And so their whole existence relies on not looking alive. And some of the positions that moths will take are just incredibly weird. And these are fairly standardized across the whole species. So if you see this particular one, it almost always has its rear end practically touching its nose. Or, this one always looks like a little table. Or they always stick their butt up in the air, or stand on two legs. So these are positions that will either fool maybe a bird or a predatory wasp or something. So in some way they defend themselves. And how about looking like a bird dropping? That's something, birds do not eat droppings. And so anything with white, black, and kind of mottled gray in it, they often look pretty darn good, and they don't move when you bother them because bird droppings wouldn't move either. So here's a more sophisticated thing that is jumping spider mimicry. So jumping spiders often have a set of eyes that you can see. They kind of glow. They sometimes have white below it. They've got legs. There's a fly that is very well known for looking just like a jumping spider when you see it. It's got these little markings on the wings. They're very easy to see here. This is a moth with those same kind of markings. And it's got the 4 little eyes, even got a hairy top of the head. And if you come close to this while it's resting, it will kind of move its wings a little bit, and it looks so much like a jumping spider. And so it is warning off. That wouldn't deter, say, a bird, but these are tiny moths, and so they're going after, they've got small predators too, the smaller things that would probably not attack a jumping spider. Aposematic coloring, especially if it's a surprise, works. So bird dropping mimics when they're left alone, but if you really keep bugging them, they show off all the scary red or orange markings. And that's like the second line of defense, saying, but don't eat me. I might not be a bird dropping, but I've got defenses. And sometimes if that doesn't work, some moths even can produce a kind of smelly liquid from glands on their thorax. It comes out like this in little globs. And if you don't bother them after that, they sometimes suck it back in. So they don't waste that liquid. It's like, I've watched them, stick it out, and then it goes away, and it doesn't just drop off. They actually suck the liquid back into their body. So here's that aposematic coloring I was talking about. These are 2 daytime flying moths. They're done for the year now, but in the spring you can see both of these. And they've got the white and black and some orange and stuff, just, definitely look like they're not very palatable. Even their caterpillars have that kind of defense. One other thing I didn't mention about caterpillar defenses, the front and the back looking the same. And you would think, well, okay, you can't tell where the head is. Birds wouldn't care. They'll grab it in the middle. But a parasitoid wasp needs to find the exact location it has to successfully lay its egg. And if it can't tell the front from the back, that's going to be a problem. So that helps in that way. So orange and black. A net-winged beetle is very distasteful. It's got chemicals in it that are kind of pretty toxic. This is a moth that feeds during the day. It's got the same coloration. And they both look very much like a lot of wasps. And wasps are not only capable of stinging, at least the females can, but they also, that venom that's in a wasp tastes bad. So when you see a bird catch a bee or a wasp, they often kind of beat it and get rid of what looks like the stinger, but they're probably also trying to get rid of the distasteful venom sac. So if looking like something more dangerous is good, how about a sphinx moth that looks like a big bumblebee? And it really does. This one can fly during the day because it looks very bee-like, complete with no scales on the wings to mimic a bumblebee. And we have a number of wasp mimics, and a lot of them are daytime flyers. They have strange things on their legs. They have, stripes and bars where you wouldn't imagine them. They've got the black and white coloring, all that stuff. But this is like the very best in terms of the wasp mimicry. They look convincingly like a wasp. And these are in the group, they're called clearwing moths, but they're also often known as squash borers. And they attack things in the cucumber family. The caterpillars will feed on the insides of the stems. But if you ever see any of these, you'll do a double take and think it looks like a wasp, but you can't place what it is. But there's one thing that they have no defense against. So I don't really need to tell Master Naturalist this, but if you're ever doing any talks for general gardeners, pesticides are just general killers, and caterpillars and moths, they have no defenses against that. And so as a major part of the food chain, you don't want to be eliminating a big chunk of the possible food that's there. So, you might have to share plants with a few of those worms that like to eat things. Okay, so I'll leave you without not a scary picture of somebody spraying poison all over, but just some of the moth diversity. And if you're willing to look at the tiny stuff too, some of it is gorgeous. They're really pretty colors, a lot of metallics and unusual shapes in that. So that kind of wraps up a general introduction to moths. And I'll be glad to take questions. So,
okay, Valerie. First rattle out of the box, Tony Plutino writes, I want Valerie to know that her good humor is translating, although she can't hear us chuckling. Nice delivery of great info. And of course, Molly Hoke also agreed with Tony. And I do too. I kind of, some of it's dry, but I got it. It was good. Okay. I have a question from Will Shaw. And he asks, is the silkworm eating the silk line or gathering it in?
that's a good question. It seems to gather it. And I would think it could eat it because it's got protein in it and it would be something that it could re-ingest. But I've never really seen it do it. So, and it's not really a lot of silk. It's nothing like a spider's web, which is a huge amount of silk, and they do re-eat it. So I'm not sure about that one. And that's a very good question, though. And it might have, a similar question is whether caterpillars eat, first of all, their eggshell, or when they shed their skin. Some of them do eat the old skin, and others don't. So it varies.
Okay. And then I have a question about the picture of the scorpion. It looked like there were little tiny orange bugs all over it.
Yes, those are mites. And a lot of scorpions, and you'll see them on harvestmen too, little daddy longlegs. They have little parasites that live on them, and they don't seem to really hurt them because scorpions might carry several of them. But they're kind of like a little wood tick or a flea eating on their liquid. Yeah, that's what that was.
Okay. Tony has another question. He asks, Cactoblastis, I think that's how you say it, was big news for a while. Is it still an issue of high concern? And you're going to have to explain what it is because I have no clue.
Okay, the Cactoblastis is, it's a cactus-feeding caterpillar. We have a bunch of those already here. We have a number of native caterpillars that burrow into the cactus pads and feed on them. Well, the Cactoblastis is not a native and it's spreading. And it tends to not just eat a little of the pad, it tends to really proliferate and kill a cactus plant. And if you've had problems with things like prickly pear overrunning a field, you'd say, well, good, but it's not good if it starts attacking all our native cactuses. And we have some rare ones, and Texas has a diverse cactus population. They seem to be spreading from the east along the coast, and they've been seeing spreading inland. So they said it's just a matter of time before that species does enter in, and it may be quite devastating for certain cactus populations. It may also, if it gets into any place where the cactus is grown for the pads or the fruits, or any, it's commercially grown in Mexico, and so that could be a big problem. So that's why, yes, they are on the lookout for that and kind of monitoring it. It's right along there with crazy ants and the emerald ash borer. We're being assaulted by all kinds of invasive species that have no major predators that enter a new territory. And
okay, I remember seeing. I now know what you're talking about because I had seen a webinar on these. I just couldn't remember the name of it, but I have also seen some prickly pear patches that have been attacked by them, and they are just sad. I mean, really sad. So, yeah, they do a number on it. Wow. Well, we have lots of folks that are saying thank you, from Nellie Sadler, and from Molly and Vicky. And my husband says that it's amazing. Before tonight, I thought moths were kind of blah, but they are a lot more interesting than that. And Laura was fascinated with this. And Debbie Thompson says, thank you. Lucy Spade says, very interesting. I'll have to start looking closer at my plants and trees. Thank you. Actually, it makes me feel like I also ought to take a magnifying glass outside with me. And Maura said she loved the presentation. Linda Miller, I now see moths through a different lens. Thank you. And from Nancy, lots of interesting things about moths that I would never have dreamed of. Me either. And from Pam, just made me want to go out in the backyard to see what is out there. Great presentation. Thanks. So interesting. Thank you, Valerie. That's coming from Louisa, from Trues. Great presentation. Thanks. Steve Flugel, I think that might be Connie. I'm not sure. Thank you. Excellent. From Terry Lashley. Thank you. I'm with Lucy. Need to start looking closer at plants and trees. Dennis says, very interesting presentation. Thank you. And thank you. Excellent photos. And yes, your photos are magnificent. They are great. And I suspect, Valerie, that you will, don't call us, because we will all be out in the backyard tomorrow looking at what we've got. There is no doubt about that. We have loved having you here. And I just had, my mind is boggled, quite honestly. There's just so much I didn't know about moths. And I know a little bit more now. I know to look. So that's cool. So thank you.
Well, thanks. You all have been a very good audience, and I really appreciate how you handled the talk and the setup and everything. It's one of the more professional groups about doing these, and I personally am not interested in doing any more Zoom sessions. Because you set this up so long ago, I did, but I'm ready to get back to in person.
Yeah, we'd like that too, but we're a little worried about this Delta variant. We'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah, it's very, very wise to be careful.
Thank you very much, Valerie. This is Katie, and I know you have several other presentations in your repertoire, so we might have to have you back sometime.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Maybe when we have an in-person and a Zoom, we can do both at once. That'll be great.
That would be good.
Yeah. Okay. Let's turn this back over to Elsa for a final good night.
Well, I don't have anything else. I just thank everybody that attended, and I really just sat here and really just giggled at some of the antics of some of those moths, and it was just interesting, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Valerie, for being our speaker tonight. We all enjoyed it, I know. So
you're welcome.
I don't have anything else tonight, so I will just say good night and thank you all.
Night.
Bye, everybody.
Okay, good night, everyone. We're done.